5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
You're listening to Tabletop and Beyond with your host, Justin.
But before we get started, how was your Geek Week?
And co-hosts Dan and Jason.
You have to be willing to let the dice help you tell the story.
Okay, look, this year I'm going to stop mispronouncing words. Join us as we cover board games to war games and beyond.
Okay, welcome to Winning Warcry. This is our first episode of the Tabletop and Beyond podcast segment that is focusing on Warcry. And I am joined by my co-host, Jason, and Dan Herrera. Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Excited to get into the start of a pretty cool journey with you guys.
Yeah, man. Should be
Yeah,
good.
we're really excited. You know, one of the things we talked about early on in the year, we put out a kind of big changes coming in 2022. And we had decided that, well, maybe it was mostly me, Jason, but I had decided that we really needed to focus on like Warcry specifically because we love it so much, and I just feel like we don't give it all the attention that it needs in our regular podcast.
It's true. I mean, you know, whenever we had events at GuildCon, it's always a huge hit. We have lots of people play that never played before, and they always say, man, this game is great. I want to play it some more. Next time you play, please let me know. We love it so much. I think you said once, you know, it's one of those games you can play in a very short time if that's all you got, and you still get that nice, really fun tabletop wargaming feel out of it. So I love this game. I'm excited to talk more about it.
Yeah, and as we were mapping out content for what we wanted to do for the rest of the year, I said, I don't know how we're going to fit in Warcry, so maybe Warcry needs its own segment. So this is the first episode of our monthly podcast series that we're going to be doing together. We obviously have our Tabletop and Beyond series. We also have our Talking Warhammer series. It's going to be monthly. And then this one is going to be our monthly series as well for Warcry. And as I mentioned, we're joined by Dan Herrera. Dan, we'd love having you here because you are an expert in the field, my friend. Your YouTube channel, TheSaltySea, is a wealth of information for anyone who has been playing Warcry for a long time or is just new to Warcry. You've got it all, so we love your big brain here.
Thanks a bunch. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to sort of collaborating more between the channel and the website as it up and comes a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, especially part of the excitement about starting a pod here is, you know, Warcry, it brings in people who wouldn't have normally been into sort of the big games, 40K and AOS, and almost as a result, I think it's more popular with people who play it than you would know looking at the content creator community for it, right? Because a lot of the really established wargamer content creators, you know, they all have good things to say about Warcry, but none of them would say that's their jam and they don't make stuff for it. So I'm really excited to have this website going and this podcast going just for more places for people to go if they're into this smaller, more accessible version of the game.
Yeah, and as Dan mentioned, right, the website. So this is our tabletopandbeyond.com website. We have a section dedicated for Warcry. We are working on content to get it up there right now. And our goal is to have basically like a one-stop shop for Warcry stuff where you can come learn about strategies, you know, look and see what kind of warbands are out there, if that's for you, you know, like where their strengths and weaknesses are. And like I said, Dan, you are a wealth of knowledge, and we look forward to collaborating with you. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, one of the great things is about having a podcast with Warcry, as you kind of mentioned, there's a lot of content creators out there for Age of Sigmar, Warhammer 40K. For example, you've got Rob, gosh, I forgot his last name, the Honest Wargamer. And, you know, I mean, he puts out a show every week. multiple shows. He's got a 40K show and an Age of Sigmar show, and does lots of stuff. And like you said, they have lots of good things to say about Warcry, but I think they're so invested in those big games, and that they're just like, it's just a skirmish game. It's like Necromunda. It's like Underworlds. And I don't think that they've really given the time that Warcry deserves in its own kind of setting, because it's a great little addition to the Age of Sigmar world and lore. It ties in great with it, and it's an awesome opportunity to get into the game without having to get into the game. Spend $400 more, or probably more like Actually, we did the math. This is a sort of an aside. We did the math on the Stormcast Dragons list that has been winning a lot.
Oh yeah.
And it's like $1,000 for
I
that.
believe it. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow.
So,
Well,
but
that's
meanwhile, a Warcry box is like 50 to 100.
right
depending.
there. You go. Not even, man. You get.
Yeah.
I mean, if your buddy, you come to a table and your buddy's already got all the terrain and everything, you could come to the table with a $40 box. It's just, and that's the thing is, anytime I play AOS with folks, or any of the big tabletop war games, they always like, yeah, this was fun. So what does it take to get into this? I'm like, about $500, and then a third of your life, to
hours and hours of
yeah,
painting, and
yeah, and they're like, oh, yeah, no thanks. But then I say, or we can play this Warcry game, and it's just $40 and 45 minutes at a time, and they're like,
Yeah.
that sounds good. I like that.
yeah.
So it's very, very much accessible, as you kind of said, Dan. Way more
Yeah.
accessible, I think, to a bigger audience.
So the goal of this podcast that we want to do, we're calling it Winning Warcry. There's kind of a twofold objective with that. The first is that one of the things that you focus on really well, Dan, is sort of the competitive aspect of Warcry. You talk about points balances. You talk about strengths and weaknesses. You were talking about on your show just the other day. The toughness tax, the leader tax, all those kinds of things, and all of those really informed players who want to be competitive with that. So we want to bring kind of that same spirit here on this podcast, but we also want to let folks know that Winning Warcry is really just about sitting down and playing with your buddies too, because this really is a narrative focused game. So how can you have fun while playing Warcry? You can go competitive with this, but you can also go fully narrative and have an absolute blast.
Yeah, and I think we're hoping to sort of get episodes keying in on a whole bunch of different parts of that too. So
Yeah,
I think it's going to be cool getting into it.
absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like we could have a whole episode on just the the card aspect and the draw, and whether, if you're going to be competitive, whether you stick to the randomized scenario, or if you select from specific scenarios for a stronger competitive play. But I don't want to steal the mic from Justin right now and say this is what we're going to talk about. But there's so much we could go.
Oh, there's so much content, so much content. So today, though, what we do want to talk about is getting started in Warcry. I don't know about you, Dan, but I've noticed in our Facebook group there is a lot of new players that are coming in saying hey, I just started with Warcry. Where should I go? What should I do? And so hopefully this episode will give some of those folks a little bit more direction on resources that they have and what they need to really get started, if they really want to get into it. But before we get there, what's on your guys' hobby table? Dan, why don't we kick it off with you?
So I have been basing Stormcast a whole bunch of, so I paint pretty slow and I get distracted. That's actually part of what got me so into Warcry, was being able to switch paint schemes and factions so quickly.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
I'm still working through my early Dominion box. I took a
Okay.
break for Skaven in between. I took a break for Flesh Eater Courts in between. So I've still only just finishing up the Stormcast from that box right now. And I don't know if other people get to this, but I get to that point where I'm finished painting and I'm just so proud, and then it's like, oh my God, I didn't even think about how I'm gonna base these. I have no plan whatsoever.
No, that's never
Um,
happened to me before, ever.
So that's where I'm at. It's not my most most high concept basing scheme, but I'm excited about the models in general. So yeah, getting
That's
getting
awesome.
into that, finishing them off.
So, I just, to be put all our cards on the table. I just finished the Cruel Boys like maybe a couple weeks ago. So, and I'm staring at my Stormcast right now, waiting to be painted. So, I have not yet finished the Dominion box either.
Cool. Yeah, I am the same but reverse, right? So I'm just finishing my Stormcast, and then my Cruel Boys are just I did the sort of cheapy rattle can version of a Zenithal where I sprayed them all brown, and then I went over the top with kind of a very pale green, like
Uh huh.
kind of a clover green kind of thing over the top of them. So I've got, kind of a light gradient on them, but that's it. And
Yeah.
just kind of thinking about how I'm actually going to paint them eventually. I'm thinking I'll do the same color scheme as my Iron Jaws, so that if I ever do Auric War Clans, they're all kind of in the same theme.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
That makes sense. That makes sense.
yeah.
Jason, how was your? What's on your hot? I was about to say, how was your Geek Week?
Yeah.
What's
And
on your hobby table?
What's on my hot table? No,
Yeah.
so I think I've still got my ogres there, dude. I've got in terms of Warcry, I got lots of stuff on my hobby table. But in terms of Warcry, I've just I've been running a campaign with my ogres now for I don't know, probably a year, for how often
Yeah.
we play. But
Right.
I just love them, man. They're so much fun. I mean, before that, when I played AOS, Flesh Eater Courts was my intro army to AOS, and I played them for full ITC circuit. And then I pulled them over into Warcry, and I really enjoyed them. But then I said, hey, I want to do these ogres. They're really they look really fun. I love the theme behind them. I've got my ogres pretty well painted, I think, for my Warcry ban. But I don't know what the deal is. I cannot hold on to nobblers. I swear, I find one, I paint it, I base it, and then I go to play, and it's gone. It just like runs away. I can't find them. I mean, you've played with me where like
Yes.
I've had stand-in Kroot from
Yep.
Tau Kroot to be like, oh, this is a nobbler today, because I can't find my nobblers. They just run away. So I gotta get some more nobblers on the table and keep going with those.
That's hilarious. By the way, I was talking to our friend Lincoln the other day, and he was telling me about a filthy ogres list in Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, he sent it to me. I got to take a look at it.
Oh, it's nasty. It's nasty. But yeah. Anyway, it's pretty good. Yeah.
They've had a
you've
few
been working-
people. Oh, they've had
Oh,
a
go
few
ahead.
people surprise crush tournaments with ogres just over the last month or so.
in Age of Sigmar, right?
Yeah, which is really funny
Yeah.
because, 2 months ago you had people complaining like, "Oh man, ogres have really fallen by the wayside.
Yeah.
GW, why won't you save us?" And now they're just crushing it. It's great.
Yeah, this list he was talking about, I know this is kind of a tangent, has Kragnos in it and like 12 gluttons. And the thing is that Kragnos gives them like 3d6 on their charge,
Yeah, it's
right? And so like you roll the dice and you're like, "Oh, I rolled an 11 because that's the average of 3 dice." And they get to do 11 mortal wounds on whatever they run into on that charge. It's gross.
It's pretty crazy. I think ogres are one of those, like, you don't really think about them until you're all of a sudden you're in a tournament and your next game is against ogres. You're like, oh right, ogres.
Yeah.
And then you got to deal with them. And I tell you, the first time I played ogres at the table, I totally underestimated a giant pack of Iron Gut. And
yeah.
they just in one swing slaughtered like all of my crypt horrors, and I was like, "Well, that's that game, but that was fun." They're fun. I just love the lore behind ogres. They're just stomping around, chomping everything they can get their hands on. It's just fun
They're
stuff.
just
and
hungry.
they're great in Warcry
Yeah, they're
too.
just hungry. Yeah, they. Oh man, they. I mean, I know we've talked about this before, but they had that. The lead belcher is a serious
OP.
unit to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's OP, man, based on points, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
It's an expensive unit or
Yeah.
fighter, I guess. Whatever. Anyways,
Best
I love
shooter in the
ogres.
game.
Yep.
Let's see. I am working on the Red Harvest terrain right now. And I've been working on this one for a little while. Let me tell you, they've got it's gorgeous terrain. I absolutely love it. It is amazing. But I am putting brass or bronze paint on all the banded metal that's all over all the wood platforms and stuff like that. It is one of the most tedious things I have ever done. Like, I didn't think it would be that bad. I'm like, oh, it's just like banded metal, but like it's raised, and so you kind of have to edge highlight every single one because otherwise it looks really weird if you don't. You know what I mean? Like it looks like just the top has been like bronze. So, yeah, it's been a lot of like tedious little details as I've been going through it, and so. I'm probably about halfway done with it right now. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe like 40% done with the terrain. And I'm kind of at the point where, where you're just like, dang it, I just want this. I'm at the point where you start looking at the other models and you're like, what paint scheme should I be painting those ones? And you start thinking about those ones as, you've got like the terrain right in front of you. So I'm kind of at that point.
It's the eat your vegetables part of the hobby for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely. So, which is funny because I loved putting it together, and I loved. I had an airbrush, and so I sprayed the whole thing down with some dryad bark, to get that wood down, and it looks really good. And like that all took me like, to airbrush it. It all took me like an hour, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna make such quick work out of this thing. A few weeks later, I'm still painting these banded metal things. I'm like, oh my gosh, just kill me now. So. Yeah, but I'm working on it. I love the terrain. I love that we're gonna be getting and playing with multiple height settings. It's not just gonna be 3 inches off the ground. Like there's platforms that are 6 inches off the ground now, and it's gonna be great.
It's funny.
Yeah, you've got 2, you've got 3, you've got 4, you've got 6. It's got the whole gamut. Yeah.
Yep. I'm really excited for it.
I remember when that first box came out, and we both got starter sets so that we could do, multiple games next to each other. And you went with one paint scheme, and I went with another paint scheme. So it was cool. So when we were playing, multiple games on the table next to us with friends, it had a little bit of a different feel.
Yeah.
And then I started realizing that I don't need to bring any terrain to Warcry night anymore because Justin has every single piece that's ever been made for it. And he's painted it all already, so there we go.
Yeah, I haven't painted the mausoleum yet. That's the one I need.
Oh, right. I
still need to do that one.
I like that one
been
too.
primed. It's been primed, so it looks like a cool black church right now. But
it works.
But yeah, the Soul Drain Forest, like I painted those trees. That they look pretty fun on the table. So
they do look. They're a lot of fun to play with those trees.
Yeah. So anyway, all right. Well, listen, we can't really get into our main topic about getting started yet without talking about the new stuff that's happening in Warcry. So, namely, there's 3 new boxes, or not 3 new boxes. There's 5 new boxes. 5 new boxes, right? Did I get that right?
More than you can shake a stick at.
Yes. There's new boxes out for Warcry, which these are awesome deals. Even if you're an Age of Sigmar player, you can usually pick up these boxes and definitely augment your army. I know that it was really hard for me to find the Sylvaneth box because it was cheaper to buy that box that had 3 Kurnoth Hunters and 10 Dryads in it than it was just to buy the 3 Kurnoth Hunters box. Right? So Age of Sigmar players were getting basically 10 Dryads for free by buying that Warcry box, and so you could not find it anywhere.
Yeah, I remember we had a buddy that played with us a few times. He's like, I want to play Warcry. Like, go buy Warband, man. It'll be yours. And he's like, okay, I'm looking for Sylvaneth. We're like, ooh,
sorry, buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, maybe Corvus Cabal. We're like, yeah, that's the
go
one.
that one.
Go that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but these new boxes that are coming out, there's some really good ones. The first one is the Cruel Boys. So basically, it's kind of like the Dominion half of the Cruel Boys half of the Dominion box, minus a couple of models. Like you don't get the Kiloboss on the Gnash Tooth, and I think that you don't get the Kiloboss either. But
it looks like it's the multi-part kit though. So you
Right.
can choose with your gut rippas whether you want spears or they're like meat cleaver things, which I think is pretty cool.
Yes.
So you get a little bit more option. Or, if you did get Dominion, you can get this and it won't overlap at all. And if you're missing the meat cleaver guys, you can get those.
Yeah. So, and it's a pretty good deal too. I think I saw someone did like a cost comparison. If you were to pick up all those models, like it's got 3 Bolt Boys, and to be honest with you, like it's not much more expensive than if you were to pick up a box of Bolt Boys by themselves. So you're saving yourself a little bit of money if you want a couple Gut Rippers and some Bolt Boys and things like that. So that's pretty good. Same thing with the Stormcast Thunderstrike. So that's like the Stormcast half of the Dominion box. And again, it's missing a couple of models here or there from the Dominion box, but there's a lot of value in there as well. So if you like what you see with the Stormcast Thunderstrike, what do you think about that box though, Dan? Do you think it's a good box, like to start out as a warband?
So the ones with the giant hammers, so in the Dominion box, you can only get them with the shields,
Yeah.
and I think they're better without the shields, so that
Okay.
actually makes this box kind of nice. Um, I am more into, so you've got the Vindictors, and is it now I'm blanking on what the sword Thunderstrike guys are. So if you have any swords kind of just hanging around, because if you play Stormcast,
Yeah.
almost everything that has a hammer has an alternate sword build. Maybe consider kind of just gluing those swords on there for a couple of them, and then you have the variety without needing
Yeah.
to sort of get a whole new bunch of swords. Um, and if you do that, then you have just like all the options. It's amazing. Um, so as far as, if you're willing to do just a tiny bit of converting, I think it's a great Warcry buy.
And I don't think it's gonna take a lot to convert it either. Do you know what I mean? Like if you want to put a sword on there instead of the spears or whatever, or that is it the hammers with those guys? But anyway, I don't think it's gonna take a lot of converting. So yeah. And let's see. The next one that we have is the Slanesh Mortals. What are they called? The Silberites of Slanesh. Is that right?
Sybarites, yeah.
Silberites. Yeah.
And this makes the ooh man, all of their names are rough, but the ones with the demonic heads are really sweet in Warcry. They come with like a variety of weapons. One's got a whip, one's got a
Uh huh.
cleaver, um, and they're some of the better things in that force, which is good. But I was watching on Warhammer Weekly because the AOS rules um, on the new Slanesh stuff are so rough. It's like fire sale. Like every every value box they can do, they're putting Slanesh in there because
Yeah.
they made all these incredible, beautiful models, and it's a funny thing. Very few people are interested in competitive play, and yet rules still sell models quite a bit.
Right.
Um, but they're playable in Warcry, and I think if you like them, it's a sweet box.
So I did a thing. Jason knows I do things sometimes. I did a thing on Saturday. I obviously pre-ordered the new Tome of Champions, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But I also ordered the Slanesh box and the Daughters of Cain box because those are two warbands that I did not have currently, and so I may have used some money that I probably should have put into a bank account somewhere, but that's okay. We don't talk about that, right?
Nope, we
Well,
don't.
let's jump right to that Daughters of Cain box because I think
Yeah,
that's the real gem out of all these. The
absolutely.
Lumineth one's good too. I want to talk about that one too. But the Daughters of Cain box, it's got all the stuff that's really good in Daughters of Cain, which is
Yep,
great, right? Because you can flip from Witch Elves to Sisters of Slaughter, and then Witch Elves have two different builds you can do in Warcry, and Sisters of Slaughter have two different builds you can do in Warcry.
yep.
And then the snakes, you can have shooty or stabby. Um, and the stabby snake leader is really good in Warcry. So that box, as far as just sort of infinite customization, is just incredible. And it's so hard to get Daughters of Cain for cheap because Witch Elves are $60 for a box
Oh
of
yeah.
tiny battle line unit. Um, and
Well,
it's
I
funny,
was
like,
just gonna say that like this is the biggest value in my opinion because you've gone from like having to spend like $150 to start a warband with Daughters of Cain to like $80.
yeah,
I think it was
yeah, exactly.
$80 retail.
Yep.
So yeah, like it's that is a great box. So I'm excited about that one too. I love that you know because like you can build the witch elves or sisters of slaughter, right? It's like a kind of optional multi-part kit, and they both have different builds as well. So I love that you can have the variety, and I usually do that with my war bands. Like I'll get a like for example, I've got a box of bone splitters that I need to put together, but man, one box can give you like almost like half the units in the warband, you know, because you can do arrow boys, you can do savage boys, you can do more boys, you can, you know, I mean, it's got like so many different builds that you can do with just that one box. So I love boxes like that, and I think Daughters of Canaan's like that too. And let's see, that brings us to our last box, Lumineth. What are your thoughts on Lumineth, Dan?
My hope for this box, because it's great for Warcry, but the cool thing about it is you don't get a full AOS unit out of the box. You'd have to buy two to get a full AOS unit.
Right.
So the horror is that makes all the AOS players buy two of them and they disappears right away. But the hope is that the AOS players kind of ease off of it a little bit and because it's also three different units too, so maybe you
Yeah.
wouldn't get it unless you were gonna field at least two of them. Um, so hopefully it'll be around for a little longer. Because Lumineth is another one of those where it's just so hard to start Lumineth for cheap. Um,
Yeah.
when I was doing sort of starter lists for every warband last year and doing budget lists for every warband, I actually
Uh
just
huh.
skipped Lumineth and did a meme of an elf laughing at you because it was literally impossible to build a Lumineth warband for less than $120. It was
That's
absurd.
hilarious.
Um, so yeah, now you can do it, which is huge.
Yeah. My I don't know why, but the Lumineth, like, it's the cow horns that drive me crazy. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I've, yep,
Like, there's some Lumineth
same.
units out there that are like, those are amazing looking units, and then I see the cow horn guys, and I'm like, and these are not the ones that I like. But that's okay. I'll probably still get one of these boxes eventually because I have like committed at this point to collecting war bands. So you know,
It's
they'll be on the
funny.
list eventually.
It's funny because there's a guy we used to play with in one of our local stores who just loves anything headgear. It's like the
Oh
biggest
yeah,
plume you could get. He's like, he
yeah.
sees the cow horns and he's like, I'm so excited for them.
That's
And I'm
awesome.
like, okay, man,
Yeah, he was into hats.
I will save those on the shelf for you.
Exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, those came out pre-order the Saturday. If you are interested in getting some of these boxes, I would check your friendly local gaming store. I'm sure that they're going to be carrying some of these that you can find. If not, you can order them. I hope that they have made plenty of these that people who were looking to get in and said, "Oh my gosh, like I really wanted Daughters of Cain, or I really wanted to get a Crew Boys without having to buy Dominion," and now they can do it, right? Like that'll be really good. So looking forward to it. Well, let's move on to talk about the Tome of Champions. This was big, 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 big news last week. And kind of there's rumors of it before last week, but last week when they announced it and sort of gave us a preview of what was going on, uh, I think the whole community got very excited about this. In my opinion, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Dan and Jason, about this. I think that this Tome of Champions might be the best one that they have produced yet.
I think so. I think it shows that I feel like they know what the game is or what they want it to be in a way that um, they they weren't 100% there in other tomes of champions, in terms
Right.
of
Especially like the first
their
one.
vision for what's going. Yeah, especially the first one. Um, yeah, the last one was good. The last one was I think when they brought in Soroth Core campaign, which
Yeah,
was a
that was
little bit
that's
of a
pretty
more
cool.
complex campaign system, which a lot of people liked. Um, I'm actually signed up to do my first narrative event other than just like with buddies in late March. So
This is
yeah,
a
so I'm gonna.
Adepticon, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Oh,
Um,
so cool.
yeah, but they have a really good mix, I think, of updating sort of the narrative side, the competitive side and the casual but not narrative side, kind of all three in the same tome, which, you know, is great.
It's hard to do too, right? Because that's three different groups of people that you're trying to please there, right? I would say the bulk of the Warcry fandom out there, just based on my super unscientific and unrigorous polling data, the bulk of people out there are narrative players, right? They love to play like the little campaigns with their friends and kind of do that. There's the casual gamers. I think that there's a pretty good overlap with the narrative ones. That they'll just play a pickup game. Maybe maybe it's narrative, maybe it's not. And then there's a small contingent of the competitive ones that want to do it. Now I think there would be a lot more competitive ones, but Warcry came out at literally the worst time it could have. Right, which is like right before the
Yeah.
pandemic. And so it just has suffered from not really having a lot of events where it could be played at, something that I'm hoping to see corrected in the next year or two.
And it does seem, the language they've been using around this Tome of Champions, some of the stuff that's in it, like the tournament organizer. I mean, it seems like they want to, um, empower organizers who are interested in having a tournament for this game. They want to make it easier, which I think is
Yeah,
great. And then, the points updates, we can dive more into that later, but the fact that it's even in here shows that they're at least interested in balancing this game. Um, and then, for competitive play, at least in a lot of other games, it works like this, where folks generally don't play competitively, even in somewhat competitive games, like say 40K,
yeah,
but casual players are interested in knowing what the competitive options are because that's how you keep your casual games balanced, is by knowing
right.
what's good and what's not. Um, so I think kind of greasing the wheels of one sort of third of that tricycle helps the other two as well, I think, in a big way.
That's a good point. Because it's funny. When I was putting together our little narrative session that we had during our Guild Con, which was our local gaming convention, right? It was just an 8-player narrative event that we had. Um, I put together several lists that we were playing, and I mean, they were all like pretty basic lists. I was not min maxing at all because I knew what the min maxes were, but I wanted everybody to have a good time because this was a narrative like event. It wasn't intended to be competitive, and we had like 3 out of the 8 people had never touched Warcry before. So I wasn't going to be like, oh, hey, here, like let's give you some OP warbands and or maybe Jason, here, play with your lead belchers and destroy everybody. Oh wait, did that happen, Jason?
Uh,
Yes, it
no,
did. Yes,
no,
it
it
did.
didn't.
Called
So
out.
What are you talking
yes, it
about?
did. Yes, it did.
You're just jealous because I didn't play casually against you, a
Actually, that's
seasoned
not true.
player.
You know what? You know what, Jason? You're absolutely right because you were playing Soulblight Gravelord.
Yep.
Yeah,
See?
you're playing Soulblight, and
If you haven't figured out yet, Justin has a little bit of bitterness against my lead belchers.
maybe because I play against them all the time.
Hey,
I'm
you
like,
won
those
against
stupid
them
things.
last time.
I did with Cruel Boys.
Yes, you
With
did.
Cruel Boys, that was an interesting game. And no, yeah. So
We still had some good
I
games,
think I had
though.
the OP. I think I had the OP army because I brought Skaven with like 2 rat ogres.
Yeah, I still beat you with your soul blight, though.
Yes, yes, you did. Like those, dude. I could not get to his leader. It was like kill a leader scenario, and it was just like
Oh
Back
yeah.
him in a
skeleton,
corner.
skeleton, skeleton, skeleton. Like I could not get to him.
Good
So
stuff. Good times.
yeah,
I think that's the
great.
thing, though, is that we've always, and to your point, right, that they are interested in balancing. It appears from this new book that they're focusing on points too. But I feel like every time I played, Warcry, the games never feel like just a total like blowout. It always feels like you've got a chance to do something to gain some points, to get on the scoreboard, even if you don't really even really know how to effectively use your warband, because with the objective based play, you can always kind of focus on the objective necessarily than just killing and beating up the guy next to you.
Yeah, and I think a lot of even the competitive, like the really competitive melee armies in Warcry, if you are getting destroyed by one of them, you still kill a lot of their fighters because a lot of the time they're flooding the board with lots of cheap fighters. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're just like stabbing, crushing all of their guys and not realizing you're losing until kind of late in the game when you realize when you realize that actually like you just never had a chance of winning on objectives.
Yeah,
Um, but but that's still like a fun, engaging game. You know what I mean?
exactly.
Um, and
And it's not
I
like you've
think
wasted 2 hours of your life learning that you weren't going to win. It's 30,
right.
30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the points updates, um, like they nerfed a lot of shooting stuff, and at first I had a tough time coming to terms with it because I was like, the most powerful 5 or 6 warbands in the game, only there's only a couple shooters in those warbands. But the thing is, the shooting ones are the only stuff where like you hear people complain about Caradron Overlords or Seraphon Skinks. Um, as far as like that's the one time when it can feel kind of weird. Like KO, when you're playing as KO and you lose, it feels like there's nothing you could have done about it. And when you
Mm-hmm.
play against KO and you lose, it feels like there's nothing you could have done about it.
Right.
And so they kind of um, they weakened those or like the shooting portions of those warbands while kind of strengthening some of the other pieces. And I think that's an interesting sort of statement they're making about, what they want the games to be like. They want more of those kind of fighty, engaging close combat things. And yeah, I don't know. It
Which kind
was a
of sucks
really
for
interesting.
KO.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, like they don't have any melee units like whatsoever,
They've
right?
got that
So,
Arco with the spear, who is actually legitimately incredible.
oh,
But
that's true.
yeah, yeah. But other than their spearmen, I think that's it. Um, although a few of their shooters are still pretty solid, even with
Yeah,
their points hits.
Now,
yeah,
have they? I haven't looked. I have not deeply looked into changes yet. Obviously, I don't have the book in my hand yet. But is it just a balance on points, or are there any fact attributes changes or ability changes?
So the only ability changes were additions of Underworld's warbands, right?
Okay.
So a lot of people like, and KO is no different, but a lot of them got sort of a new, interesting ability with their Underworld's warband, but otherwise it was just points updates.
Gotcha. Okay.
So they helped out some move 3 fighters. They helped out some of the high toughness fighters that were in a rough spot.
Yeah.
Um, and then they kind of taxed speed, shooting, and like really chunky fighters with lots of wounds. They
Mm-hmm.
taxed a bunch of
yeah.
those a little
Yep.
bit. And really interesting because I've been playing games on Red Harvest. Have you guys been playing Red Harvest?
Not yet. I gotta finish this stupid terrain. It's
Yeah.
mocking me right now on my table.
So one of the things I think a lot of people saw right away with Red Harvest was like flying is going to be big, right? Because there's so much terrain.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how much it would help shooting because if you stand on some terrain, you can see everything. So it's
Oh
actually
yeah.
harder to hide than you would think. Like you would think more
Yeah. There's
terrain
no
means more
cover.
places to hide, but it's also it's like a lot of it is oh right, so a lot of it's cover but not line of sight blocking, so they can still shoot at you,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
it means you can't really get to the shooters to close with them as
Yep.
easily because you have
Yep.
to go the long way around. um, so that might also be why they nerfed some shooting, is because I do think like KO got way better in Red Harvest. They were one of the big winners because they've got flying and shooting.
Yep.
So I think that might have been part of why they nerfed it. I, I have a little conspiracy theory, a little tinfoil hat, that they want all the future Warcry box sets for the terrain to feel a little bit like the Red Harvest terrain of
Yeah. I
just
can
like
see that.
crowded all over the place. Almost like Necromunda terrain is a little bit like that too. Um, and and so I think these points updates, hitting flying a little bit or just fast things in general and hitting shooters maybe reflects what they want this kind of new landscape of the game to look like.
So, just sticking with the points changes here. You some of the major takeaways that you said, right? They taxed flying, they taxed shooting a little bit. They gave a buff to movement 3 guys. They taxed some of the, or they gave a little bit of a buff to the toughness, the high toughness people who were just basically meat shields. They taxed some of the bigger fighters, like I'm assuming like a rat ogre type of thing, right? That
Yeah, Rat Ogre went up 10, or like the Doom
yeah.
Bull went up a little bit.
Yeah, so they did that. But so those are some of the major takeaways. What war bands, in your opinion, were like some of the winners, and like what ones were the losers?
Um,
Were there any clear
so
winners or losers here, or was it kind of across the board?
yeah, so the losers, I mean, like we said, KO. I mean, KO had been such a winner of Red Harvest, but
Uh huh.
was a loser of the points updates, absolutely. And then, Seraphon with
Mm.
Bolt Spitter Skinks going up. Um, or also Vanguard. Like, if you were sick of birds flying everywhere, I don't know if you've ever faced down that all bird list, but the birds took a real hit from 45 points to 65 points. And uh,
That's a big increase.
yeah, that's huge. And between us, like, I think a lot of people are saying a sigh of relief. I think
Yeah,
if you've ever gone against the all bird list, it's pretty embarrassing to just be getting worked by just a flock of birds.
yeah.
Um, so those were some of the losers. I think winners, probably the Spider team is the biggest winner, in my opinion, because
Okay.
they dodged. They're not in here. Maybe there will be an FAQ, but the Red Harvest warbands aren't in the book. I think because they said that this book was supposed to come out in 2021,
Right.
and that would have been before Red Harvest, and so I wonder if that just wasn't supposed to happen. So, maybe we get an FAQ, but if not, I think the spiders from the Tarantulos team, those spiders are just incredible. They've got 8 attacks, uh, just just little blenders. So them still being at 35 points, I think, is a huge win for them. And
Yeah.
then I think ogres, because the Thunderfist, the Ledge Belcher leader, didn't go up, and neither did Noblars.
Hmm.
Wow. Those Noblars at let's see, they're at like 45 points, right?
Yep.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, like they're so annoying. So annoying. Cuz like Jason was doing his campaign, so of course like his dominion grew, right? And so he was like getting extra points to add to his warband. He's like, I could throw another Nalbar or two in here, and I'm like, like yeah, good times with those little guys. Those little maybe I have no idea where your nobblers are going, Jason.
Yeah, maybe there we go. That's the problem. Next time I'm over at your place, I'm going to be searching your stacks for my nobblers.
So, Dan, you mentioned earlier kind of the Bladeborn being added here. And I know you were kind of just mentioning it a little bit in passing, but I think it deserves a little bit more attention because this was, to me, like one of the biggest announcements with this book.
Huge, right? And
Yeah,
so, like, so far, they released pictures of the Bladeborn parts of the book, and I've been like squinting at them, trying to figure out exactly what's going on. Some of the abilities are just like some were it's just too fuzzy. I can't quite make it out,
yeah,
but no matter what, it's going to be a big deal, I think. There's just so many of these fighters, and the fact that they all have at least one brand new ability that comes with the crew,
yeah.
I think is going to be really, really a big deal. Um, and some of them bring in new fighter types that group hadn't, that faction hadn't seen before, which is
Like the
cool.
Identithican crab. Nobody's seen that guy before.
Yeah, exactly. Crab Cry is on its way. Like Sylvaneth have 2 archers now, which they never had before. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of kind of new stuff there.
There's and I saw, what is it, with Hrothgar's trappers or whatever it was with the ogres, right? He's got like the trap is a unit that
Yeah, and
he
I
can
think
throw
there's
out there.
abilities around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to be able to have my hands on the physical copy and actually be able to read it clearly so I can actually tell people, what it does. But um, yeah, it promises a lot for sure.
I'm really excited because I ended up picking up several. Like I've got the Zarbag's Gits, right, as part of like the Gloomspite Gits thing, to kind of round that out as proxies. I picked up the Sepulchral Guard with the the skeletons, as part of like a Legion of Nagash army, so I could like have some cool skeletons on there. So now I'm like, oh, cool! I've got these, and they're ready to go, and this will be awesome to kind of add in there. So I'm excited because the rules as it states is that if you bring the leader, then you can also bring the other fighters, right? You can't just bring the fighters over. You have to have the leader to import the other fighters if you want. But I think it just gives so many options, which is good on one hand. On one hand, it's great. On the other hand, it's really good because we were talking about the tournament organizer before, and one of the things that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that it states in the book is that it recommends not allowing allies at tournaments and in match play. Did I read that right? Did I hear
I
that
think
right?
so, yes. And the Adepticon tournaments aren't going to allow allies either.
Yeah, and I think that you know, it's avoiding the contorted epitome problem, right? Which is like the contorted epitome is so good that you would be dumb not to take it, right? It's almost an auto include,
Right.
and
And Order has
so
the High Sentinel. It's kind of the
yeah,
best kept secret in Order, but for 95 points, you can get a little Lumineth model that can point at any opposing model on the board and say, anytime you attack it, you just blend it to pieces. And it's only 95 points, right? So you'd
yeah,
be, like you said, kind of silly not to take it.
right. So I can understand, and it would be really hard to balance the game if you were really like taking into account all like you can have war bands that are balanced that might have that blender, high sentinel unit in there because everything else is not that great, you know. But to be able to balance those models with every other order model or other order warband is really hard to do and really hard to play test because there's so many different possibilities. So I can understand why tournaments are like, yeah, no allies, but I'll be curious to see if that includes not allying in the Bladeborn as well. For that faction. So, for example, the Zarbag's Gits, like being able to ally those guys into a normal Gloomspite Gits list.
So
Um,
my read on it
yeah.
is if you make it your leader, it's not an ally, right?
Okay.
So and then you can
That's
have
true.
anything there. But my read on it is that they're technically heroes if they're in your faction, and
Okay.
heroes are okay.
And heroes are
So I'm
okay. Yeah.
pretty sure you can, as long as it's the one from your faction.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
But they talk about how like in match play, you can technically make a warband from any two that share a grand alliance because you make one the leader and the other one your ally, and now you can bring any model from both of them.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas I think they won't let those specific types of things be in tournaments.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. So what that'll do though is like, for example, a Bone Splitters list isn't crazy competitive. You know what I mean? But maybe those Underworlds models will bring in some new abilities and maybe have some different stats that all of a sudden like they might be a little competitive because you can bring those in.
And
So
the
I'll
other
I'll be
thing,
excited.
some people compete on this access, some people don't, and it's up to every individual. But so the Underworld models generally are some of the best sort of painting
Oh yeah,
showcase models
yeah,
that have ever come out at GW. I mean, it's incredible some of the stuff that they do with those. They're all just like much more bespoke poses, much more sort of dynamic. Um, and if you're the kind of person who wants to try to win best painted at events, I think Underworld's models are just a huge way to kind of give yourself a leg up for winning Best Painted because,
yeah.
you're just going to have a more exciting, a more dynamic looking warband than you would otherwise if you're including them, which I think is pretty cool.
I can't wait to see the painting competitions for these warbands because I think people are more willing to spend more time on 8 models than 800 models. So I'm really excited about that. So the Tome Champions 2022 comes out on shelves on Saturday. Again, like if you haven't pre-ordered it, I'm sure that you could go down to your friendly local gaming store and pick it up there. I highly recommend it. It's got, again, all the points changes, but it's got a lot of new good stuff. I saw some of the campaigns, like the siege battles that you can do. They look amazing. Looks like a ton of fun. So I'm really excited to really dive into this one. I think it's by far the best Toma Champions that they've come out with, and I think it's going to be great. So let's move on to our main segment then. Talking about getting started. So as I mentioned early on, I think with the new announcement, with the new boxes coming out, with the new Toma Champions, it's really given an uptick in interest in Warcry, and I'm seeing, like, on the daily, it seems like 3 or 4 people in that Facebook group is like, hey, thanks for letting me in, and I'm new to Warcry. Where should I start? Where should I start? Where should I start? I feel like we get that question all the time. And so I would love us to kind of dive in and talk about, like, how to actually get started in Warcry. So, Jason, why don't you kick us off with, like, the original, the OG Warcry stuff?
You mean like the original box and
yeah.
all that stuff? Yeah, I mean, can you even buy the original box still?
It is hard to find, but it's out there.
You have to do a pilgrimage. You have to, strap on your boots and wade through the snow uphill. No matter where you're going, it'll be uphill.
And in the snow, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I remember, I think the original one came. What did it come with? It came with Untamed Beast, Iron Golems, right?
Yep.
It was just those 2, right, that came in,
and a bunch of monsters. Didn't it have like all the Raptorics?
It had all the chaotic beasts.
Untamed or chaotic beasts,
yeah.
right? Chaotic beasts, which by the way are really fun to play with. And I think, what did we do the other night? We did we had one guy had to leave early, and so we did a 3-player game where 2 people played and the other person just played the chaotic beasts.
Yeah, and it was a blast.
Awesome. It was
so much fun. So much fun.
Yeah, but anyway,
because the chaotic beast was just like, I'm wreaking havoc everywhere.
Right. I don't care who you are. Right. But yeah, so then it was, and then the terrain, right? And the terrain, I think, was really cool. It introduced the concept that your terrain could change every time you played based on which card you drew. Mm-hmm. That terrain is reusable across the board. Like we talked about before, right? It's not like the Red Harvest where you've got multi-layers. So it was really just 3 inches or on the ground, except for the bell tower. There was one piece that had the bell tower. But I don't know if I've ever played too many games where anyone's ever climbed to the top of the bell tower.
There really hasn't ever been a need to get up there.
I guess if somebody wanted to put, because the objectives are typically, they're just, it doesn't matter where they are vertically. It's really just kind of a horizontal.
Yeah. Now I think with Red Harvest and Dan, you probably played more with this. Like, there's more opportunities to put objectives up on top of those platforms.
There is.
Is that true?
And it's funny, if your battle card doesn't put the objectives on the platforms, a lot of the time the platforms just herd you into a little center place where there isn't terrain because, climbing them takes up so much time. But then a lot of other ones get you spread out across the board like that, and it's cool. I don't know if you guys did this with the base game, but I just had so much fun, like, creating my own terrain layouts with the little bridges that go from platform to platform.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh yeah, definitely. It was funny because the cards are there and the cards are a lot of fun, but after a while you're just kind of like, I'm just gonna move this around here because you kind of get a feel of like where generally objectives are gonna be and like what a good layout might be and stuff like that.
That was the beauty behind Warcry is, Games Workshop, when it first came out, even in all their intro videos, they were very much like, guys, it's not an exact science. Like, if you need to put a guy on the board and there's not room for him, then just nudge him over a little bit. Yeah. And it's kind of how Warcry, is with the terrain, too. It's like, put the terrain down And then when it's time to play subjectives based on the card you drew, if you and your opponent look at the terrain, it's like, well, that doesn't really make sense. All right, I'll just nudge the terrain over a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't really matter. It's about, playing a game, having fun, and just creating kind of an immersive little board in front of you. And so yeah, did a ton of that. Like, oh, let's put some ladders here. Let's put a little cross bridge here. Just make it fun.
I think that the original Warcry box was probably the best deal that Warcry has ever had. Because not only did you get the 2 war bands and the chaotic beasts and all the terrain, right? Like you got the core book, you got a ruler, you got dice, you got all the tokens, right? You got all that stuff that came with it. It was a hefty box, and I want to say we got it for $150.
Yes, in fact, if you go to eBay now, you can see they're running about 350.
Ooh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Well, there's a couple that are, on the like 150, but if it's like $150, but $50 for shipping. So you're like, okay, all right. But
yeah, every now and then I'll see on the Facebook group somebody's like, "Hey, I was just in my FLGS and look what I found," and it's like the OG Warcry box. And everybody's super jealous.
Yeah.
So
That's the pilgrimage, I'm telling you. You got to drive cross country, stopping at every game store along the way until you find one.
Yeah. So, obviously it's really hard to find the original box now, but
you can still buy all the parts of it for the most part.
You can buy all the parts of it, right? And so, like, to assemble it separately, it's obviously going to cost you a little bit more money. You can get the Iron Golems band separate. You can get the Untamed Beast separate. You can buy the card packs that you need separate if you want to. I highly recommend getting the mission card pack and the twist card pack. I don't think you necessarily need the terrain card pack because you can kind of make that stuff up on your own. But you definitely need the mission and the twist, right?
Yeah.
And the deployments. You need the deployment one too.
Yeah, so I don't think you have to feel like, man, I'm never going to be able to achieve that again. And then even, even with all of the options for terrain now, there's no need to feel like you've got to go get that original terrain unless you're just kind of the collectionist like Justin is.
Yeah, you know what's cool about that terrain though is like I used it several times for Age of Sigmar games. Like it's great terrain just in general.
I think any of the terrain from the Warcry, from most of the Warcry boxes, I think any of the terrain is dual use for sure.
Well, and to be fair, and I think we'll talk about this, let's talk about this right now. There are Warcry terrain boxes out there, right, that have the Soul Drained Forest. It's got the Mausoleum. It's like the Sigmarite Ruins. It's like the Shattered Domain stuff. Is that what it's called, Shattered Domain? Anyway, and the interesting thing about these is these boxes, these terrain boxes, are really just repackaged Age of Sigmar terrain. And it's repackaged because it has a board, a Warcry board. It's got the tokens, and then it's got a little bit more. So, for example, the Soul Drained Forest is six of the Citadel Woods trees, and then a bunch of scattered terrain like columns and crash down boulders and things like that you can scatter around. So, but those trees, if you were Sylvaneth, like those trees could be your trees that you would play with in your Age of Sigmar game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting because I'll be honest with you. If you try to get your work, some people buy their stuff off Amazon, some people buy off Games Workshop. Go to your local store, whatever you want. I'll be honest with you. If you go to Games Workshop's website, it's a little goofy to try to find all the Warcry stuff you want on their main store. I feel like it's not as intuitive to like how do you even find the terrain on their store page? I usually
moved
just
it too. I think they just moved it from boxed games to now it's like a subsection of Age of Sigmar. They kind of experiment with where they want to put it. They haven't decided long term, it seems like.
Yeah, but I mean, I usually just go to Amazon and type Warcry terrain if I want to try to find something. But But I think there was only, and I can't remember the name of it, there was one Warcry terrain box set that came out that I was not a fan of the terrain. I felt like it was a little bit of a cop-out. I felt like it was just, a board. It was like a board with lava, and
Oh,
it
that's
was just
Catacombs.
doors. It
Oh,
was just, I felt like it
Catacombs,
was just doors and like flat terrain pieces.
So I don't have the Catacombs box set. Do you, Dan?
So
Obviously,
what
Jason
I did
doesn't.
with Catacombs is I bought the Catacombs board,
Uh-huh.
and then that was it. I didn't buy any of the terrain because it had half of the starter set's terrain. It didn't have the bell
Right.
tower. It didn't have the
Yeah,
that
it just had a
awesome like
couple of the,
head
yeah.
thing, but it had just enough of the kind of ruins in it that you can play a base game on the back of it if you want.
Yeah.
The only thing I will say positive for the Catacombs terrain set is it's great for D&D. Like you can make a D&D dungeon out of it
Oh
Hmm.
really
yeah.
well
Yeah.
with those doors and stuff. So, if you're someone who plays a few different tabletop games, you can get double duty out of it. You can't really put it into AOS
Right.
because, what are doors going to be doing on the middle of a battlefield? But as far as, other types of dungeon crawly games, yeah, you can definitely use all that stuff in those games and it can be
Yeah, and
cool.
I think I kind of wonder if they were shooting for that, because wasn't this their second terrain box?
Yeah. It
It,
was their
yeah,
second
it
starter
was.
box.
Second starter box, yeah. Because I mean the entire board, it's like 1 inch grid, right? It's like 1 inch grid tiles. They got all these things that you could utilize, like you said, in kind
Good
of a
point.
dungeon crawl. So I kind of wonder if they were exploring are we going to be able to dual purpose? Are people interested in this?
And they released other boards too for alternate dungeons for Catacombs, so I wonder about that too. Um, it's funny, being in the US, I feel like most people who are into that kind of thing, they play D&D, they don't play the hams. But like I think in the UK, I think people play essentially D&D, but with their Warhammer armies and
Uh
stuff.
huh.
I think people do that much more commonly than they do
Hmm.
here, and yeah, it'd be fun to be a fly on the wall of the Games Workshop execs sort of deciding whether or not that experiment worked.
So I couldn't tell with Catacombs. And you get the question all the time, right? Like, should I get Catacombs? And I feel like it's like the redheaded stepchild a little bit of Warcry. In that it's kind of a different game. Like it's still Warcry. There's still like the mechanics of Warcry are still there, but because you've got the doors and the walls and things like that, and like the dungeon crawl type of feel, I couldn't tell if the narrative of Age of Sigmar, which was like the idea that the shadow stalker elves, right, like went down
Yep.
and were trying to like scout out and figure out where the Varanite was for Marathi, right? Like that was like kind of the lore that was happening at the time in the Shattered Realms book series. And so I couldn't tell if the lore was driving the game or if they had the idea for the game and they're like, "Ooh, this is how we can fit it into the lore."
Because it ended
Like a
up
chicken or egg.
yeah, it ended up shaking the whole AOS kind of the whole foundations of the setting. Um,
Yeah.
Basically based on stuff that happened in that board in that game.
On that board, which is
Yeah,
crazy. In that
specifically
board.
that board. Yeah, yeah. Which is
Yeah.
fascinating. So I do wonder, maybe they did kind of make the board for the game. Uh, what I, the one thing that is kind of cool about it is, so I've lost games because I had a mounted unit that couldn't get to where it needed to go because it was blocked off from terrain
Oh, right.
everywhere.
Hmm.
And that, if you love your cavalry, I don't know, maybe narratively the idea of them charging down these
Right.
tiny dungeon hallways is kind of silly, but man, is cavalry good in Catacombs because, they're pointed at knowing that the Mount Rune Mark is a bit of a drawback, right?
Uh-huh.
So their stats other than the Mount Rune Mark a lot of the time are pretty good. Um, and so, yeah, cavalry in Catacombs is really, really good.
That's funny. I heard that like Night Haunt is like that's like the one place where they thrive because they can fly through walls.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. They were also a big winner of the points updates. They got some
Hmm.
really, really heavy ones like Mirmorn Banshees are pretty good now. Um, but yeah, I think you're right because the Catacombs sort of fits with a lot of the things they're good at, and they can
Yeah.
float across the lava really easily, which helps them.
So the catacombs, right? Like we talked about how the narrative of Age of Sigmar literally took place down there, right? The Shadow Stalkers like went down in there. They're scouting out this Varanite source for Marathi, and she was able to like go in and get it. Well, the second half of that story, where she was actually able to obtain it from the production underneath the Varan Spire, played out in Red Harvest. So I think that that's kind of interesting too, right? So you're the Red Harvest, right? Like the terrain that you have is a bunch of like platforms. You got a whole bunch of like mill, not mill. I don't know what you would call it, but conveyor belts and things like that. You know that are pumping out this Varan juice, right? Like
Yeah.
the Varan gold that like can transform you. And Marathi ended up like injecting herself with that and becoming a god. And so like it's so crazy that you're reading these books and you're like, wait a minute, I have that terrain. I have that board. Like I've played that in Warcry. It's like it's not playing out in Age of Sigmar. All of this narrative stuff that happened in the Broken Realm stuff is like playing out in Warcry. I think it's kind of rad.
It's cool
Yeah.
how they tie it together for sure.
And if you spend some time with I call it the bucket tower. It was the
Yeah.
bane of my existence for an entire afternoon. But when you spend some time
That
with
is
it,
not.
once
It
you're
was not
painting,
easy to put it together.
not easy to put together. Um, but when you spend some time with it, it's really cool. Like you can almost like feel it kind of moving as the buckets kind of go down, collect the Varan juice, and then bring it back up and pour it
Yeah.
into the bobsled tracks. Um, yeah, it's pretty cool. They definitely go out of their way to kind of, you know, help you with the narrative, kind of move along in a way that, the other games don't really get as much.
So we need to go back to catacombs though really quickly. I jumped ahead to Red Harvest. In the catacombs box, if you were to pick that up, you get the man. I keep blanking on their name. They're the Shadow Stalker. What's their full
Yeah,
name?
the K-Knight Shadow Stalkers, and
Yeah,
then
Knight
the
Shadow Stalkers.
Scions of the Flame, which I think are incredible as far as their look goes, and
Yeah,
they let you paint them in so many different cool ways, like in terms of how you want to paint fire.
they're
Um,
like
yeah,
flaming samurais. Like
yeah, I
they're
think that's a
awesome.
great descriptor. Yeah.
You know, like they look
Um,
like samurais, like samurai warriors that are just like burning.
Hmm.
They look
yeah,
awesome.
and I've had this concept in my head. I don't have them, but I want to paint them copper, and then the way copper burns green. So then I would paint
Oh,
the
that'd be
fire
cool.
Oh,
green,
cool.
and then it would be this kind of green, and copper's, that kind of red. I would do it like new copper,
Yeah.
so that it was more contrasting because it's got that kind of reddish gold to it. So yeah, just a lot you can do with those. And if you love painting robes, the Shadow Stalkers have the fanciest robes in all the land, so those are pretty cool too.
How are they?
Hmm.
How are the Shadow Stalkers in terms of warband?
So that's another one I don't have, so I can't tell
Yeah.
you from personal experience. You have to be fancy with them though,
Okay.
because they can all shoot, which can be good, but man, are they fragile, right? So you have to really know what you're doing as far as putting yourself just outside of your opponent's threat range to get what you need to get done,
Yeah.
completed. Um, but yeah, who knows? I think one of their models just got a pretty big points drop, and I'm blanking on which one it was, but Scion's got some points drops too, actually. So both of the models in Catacombs, if you love painting them up and you want to paint up a second one to then kind of specialize and optimize,
Yeah.
they're both a lot better than they used to be. Just as of the last week. So I haven't sort of put together what that list would look like. There's probably other people who play them who would know better than me at this point. But yeah, there's kind of from a Johnny list building point of view, there's a lot that happens there.
And if I'm not mistaken, Scions of the Flame, they're pretty decent. Kind of one of those bespoke Warcry chaos bands, right? They're probably near the top in terms of the solely Warcry war bands.
Yeah, once you buy a double box of them, they're pretty good because they've got the two things you want, where like they've got cheap models that actually do things,
Yeah.
and then they have a few sort of high damage hammers, um, and I think the big one has range two too, so that gives you
Oh,
kind of
nice.
extra maneuverability. Um, yeah, so they're solid once you get the double box of them. They've got a couple real stinker fighters in there. I think the
Mm.
Inferno Priest and the Fireborn are a little rough, but once you get the double box, um, they're really good. Yeah, they're one of the
Yeah.
better ones.
So, and again, like this comes with the board. We talked about the Catacombs board, right? The terrain with it as well. It came with core books with the special rules for Catacombs, dice, ruler, etc. I think that the Catacombs box is still you're still able to find it in
Yeah.
places.
Yeah, you can get it for about $180
Yeah,
on eBay
yeah.
or such.
Okay, so
That's
jumping
less than
forward,
it retailed for, right?
I know. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So jumping forward to Red Harvest. So we talked about the terrain, right? We got lots of platforms, lots of height, which is different with this one. The two warbands that came with this one are the Dark Oath Savages and the Tarantulos Brood. And so I know that you said that the spiders, the Tarantulos Brood, are a pretty good warband, and mostly in part because of the spiders, right?
Yeah, I mean they're the strongest warband in the game, just because of the spiders and because birds took a big nerf. Um, but they're still pretty cool even if you don't like min-maxing. They've got a ton of stuff they can do, like resurrecting spiders, stuff like that. The coolest though, the Dark Oath Savagers. If you ever picked up the Sphinx, what's it called? The Mind Stealer Sphinx
Yeah.
Yep.
from that first. So the Savagers have this thing. It's so cool. Um, you can throw two dice away to give yourself like a pretty, I think it's like an 88% chance at getting two dice next turn. So
Oh,
you can
interesting.
invest in getting a ton of wild dice, and if you bring in an ally who is really dice hungry, right? One of the problems bringing in the Mind Stealer Sphinx is it has so many different abilities it wants to be doing that it can kind of hog dice from your other friends. Um, but the Darko Savagers have like it's raining dice over there with them.
Oh,
So you
nice.
can just use all sorts of abilities. So if you like the Sphinx, if you love your Contorted Epitome, if you have any kind of really dice hungry ally, the Myrmidon too, but any kind of dice hungry ally, the Savagers are like the perfect home for it, which I
Yeah.
kind of like.
That's really interesting because I was looking over their abilities and I'm like, man, these guys seem kind of mediocre in terms of just like their abilities. And I didn't put it together of some of these bigger monstrous allies that they could be taking, right? Like the Sphinx or the Myrmidon or whatever. I also think that the Dark Oath Savages could really benefit from having the Dark Oath Chieftain from the Slave to Darkness there with them.
Oh, such a
You
missed
know,
opportunity. I wish that was there too. Yeah.
I'm like, how is he not in here with them? Like, at least in the rule set, right? Like, but having him in there as an ally, I think helps them because he's got a wallop on his ability. Like, he adds the damage of his quad to all attacks and critical hits as well. Hits and critical hits, right? And he's not a light swinger either. So he can be a hammer for you if you need it. Yeah, he's pretty
Yeah, so a
good.
lot to play with those ones.
Yeah.
Um, And then let's see, what else do you get with that box? So that one's another one where the board is double-sided, so you can either
Yep.
play with a ton of lava or you can decide to have a little bit more open plan, kind of depending on what you want to do.
Yeah, I don't know if you've noticed this, but when I got a bunch of the different terrain pieces, right? Soul Drain Forest, the Corpse Rack Mausoleum, the base game and stuff like that. There's the side that you normally play with, but if you flip it over, there's the brown side that looks like the Shattered Domain um, a plastic set that they used to have in the Games Workshop, right? That
Yep.
was like the big squares. So it looks like that, and I've noticed that every terrain has that. So now I can take those 4 boards that I have, flip them over to the brown side, and I can now play an Age of Sigmar game on those boards because 4 of them make up an Age of Sigmar board size.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't put
Yeah.
that together, but you sure can do that, can't you?
Yep. So it's
Oh, nice.
and in fact they have been going that way. They want to make sure that those Age of Sigmar boards were like a Warcry is literally a quarter of the Age of Sigmar battlefield. So, but now that if you look at all of them, like one side, like the Kortrak Mausoleum, for example, is snowy on one side, and then you flip it over and it's that brown like Shattered Domain, and the base game had it, the Soul Drain Forest had it, and even the new Red Harvest has it as well. So now I've got 4 boards that I can play Age of Sigmar on, which is
That's
kind of
pretty
nice.
cool.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really good. All right, so we talked about the starting boxes for Warcry, right? Getting into this, if you have an Age of Sigmar army, getting into this is actually pretty easy. I don't think it's as easy as it was before because all you needed before was like the core rule book, and then you just went out and had to get a pack of cards for your fighters, right? So like if I had Daughters of Cain and I had a Daughters of Cain army, I just need to go find the cards for $10 and boom, I was good to go. Well, that all kind of changed when the Grand Alliance books came out, right?
Yeah, although in some ways it got easier because, one book gets you a whole bunch of different cards.
That's true.
Um, so in that way it's kind of nice. Also the cards got kind of hard to find if you didn't jump
Oh
on them
man,
right away.
super
Although
hard to
these
find.
these new Warcry boxes, if you want to start there, that's a great way, and they come with the cards, which is cool.
Yep.
Um, So, yeah, if you have an AOS army, like you said, it can be pretty easy of just getting the 2 books, the core book and the Grand Alliance book. And if you're
Yeah.
looking on eBay for core books, just remember the original one and the Red Harvest one, both of those are totally valid. Um, the Red Harvest one even has the errata from the core book one,
Oh,
sort of
nice.
folded into it, which is nice. So whatever you end up finding, you can do it. And then um, the board, I mean, like you said, for a lot of the terrain packs come with a board, which is cool. If
Yeah.
you're wanting to make your own, it's 22 inches by 30 inches, which is a pretty manageable. Like a lot of boxes will come with something like that,
Yeah.
or like will be about that size that you can cut out if you wanted to sort of go real cheap with it. Um, so yeah, you can build something pretty quick that way.
I think one time we played, Justin, you literally just printed out like 4 or 5 sheets of paper,
I did.
little forest terrain or something, and we just taped them together.
Yep. Because I didn't have all my terrain at that point, right? So I didn't have all the boards, and we were having like 4 concurrent games, and so I'm like, well, I'll just print these out and tape them together and put them down on the board, and they worked out great.
Yeah, that's what you
I
need,
mean,
especially
eight
when
and
you
a
get that
half by
3D
11,
terrain.
22 just being 2 11s right next to each other. That's perfect.
Yeah,
Yep,
exactly.
makes it easy.
Exactly. So yeah, we taped it on there, and then you throw the 3D terrain on top of it, and it's like you
You
don't
don't
even
even notice it.
notice.
Yeah,
You know, don't even notice.
Yeah.
So, and that's the other thing, right? Is like people ask all the time, do I need to get this terrain? Do I need to get this terrain? The answer is no. Like you really don't need the Warcry terrain. Do I like the Warcry terrain? Absolutely. That's why I kept buying it. Do you do you need it though? No. Like a lot of people have like their their foam kind of houses that they've made for Warcry. They've got little hills that they've made. They've got structures. Maybe they've got like a realm gate from or other terrain stuff that they got in Age of Sigmar. use it, man. Use all of that stuff. Like, that's great. I wouldn't recommend putting out maybe the Chaos Fortress. It's like 11 inches tall, because I don't think anybody but the Flyers are getting up on top of that thing. Um, but you know, like you've got little hills, you got little houses, you got little like villages. Like, those are great area like things to throw down for a Warcry scenario. So
Yeah,
I think it's fantastic.
there's a whole industry on Etsy of creating D&D terrain. Like if you just look for it
Yep.
there, and all of it works great for Warcry. I mean, almost everything from D&D ports into Warcry really well. So yeah, just tons of stuff that you can kind of do yourself or mix and match yourself, um, to really personalize it. Yeah, you can go the starter set route, and that's the way I went. But
Yep.
you can, with a little bit of elbow grease, you can do it 100 different ways and kind of customize to your own sort of style.
So I've got a Night Haunt army, right? And I've started collecting Night Haunt since 2017, and I've got all sorts of units. I got Chain Rafts, I got Dreadblade Harrows, I've got Mirmore Banshees, I've got, you know, the Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed. I've got, you know, basically the whole range. I've got the whole range. And when Warcry first came out, I made sure I got the Night Haunt cards, right? Because I wanted to play with them as well. And I was disappointed to see that it was like, you could have the Reapers, it was like the Reapers, the Guardian of Souls, and the Chain Rasps, and like a couple other ones, and you know, like Spirit Host, and you're like, well, this is kind of lame. Like, it's not even half the range, you know, like that I have. And so when the Grand Alliance books came out, I loved that they brought in leaders. I loved that they brought in so many more fighters, and so. If you have an Age of Sigmar army, you really need to get the Grand Alliance book, because it's got all of the options for your entire army there, and really give you a lot of choices in terms of like what to play. So if that's where you're starting, if you say like, I've already got, you know, a Lumineth army, I've already got a Daughters of Cain or a Cities of Sigmar, go out and get your Grand Alliance book. Find a core rule book, and you're pretty much halfway there, you know, ready to play. So,
And
so
depending
that's
on the
great.
army, you might have a few different warbands too. Like
Oh yeah, definitely.
Stormcast has 4 different Warcry factions in it. So if you're a Stormcast player, you might actually just kind of look up and see you've got 3 different Warcry warbands. Same with any of the Chaos Gods. They've got 2 different factions within each
Yeah.
of them. So um, yeah, you might find that.
Right.
Uh,
There's always the chaos demon. So there's like Nurgle. Well, actually, let's talk about Khorne. Right. There's the Khorne demons, and then there's the Khorne mortals. The what are they called? The blood like reavers and stuff like that. So
yeah.
you've got those two factions on either side.
Though one of
So
the things that I want to kind of transition into is what if you don't have an AOS army? Because the cool thing in my mind about Warcry is that
yes.
you can start it having never played AOS before.
Yep.
So let's go around like Jason, if you were to sort of come up on someone new and you wanted to sell them on like what's a brand new force that you would suggest starting for Warcry? Like what would be your tops? I'm just like spurring this question on you, spur of the moment. No, no prep allowed.
No, that's okay, because I would probably take the same approach that I took when I played Age of Sigmar, which was, you know, look at the one that is most appealing to you to look at, because that's what you're going to be bringing. That's what you're going to find excitement in when you're painting and all that. So honestly, you know, I brought. So I'm gonna not answer your question, and then I'll answer your question. So when we started playing Warcry, I bought the starter kit. Right, I didn't really care so much for the Iron Golems or even the Untamed Beasts. What I wanted to do was I wanted to play my Flesh Eater courts still. So I
Oh,
just
yep.
grabbed my Flesh Eater court. But the reason I played Flesh Eater courts is because I thought they just looked really cool. that's that's
Yeah.
the main reason I played them, and I ended up having a lot of
Yep.
fun with them. So when I looked at, hey, what's going to be my next Warcry thing, I looked at the Corvus Cabal for a long time just because I thought the guys looked super cool.
They do look cool.
They just look cool, you know? And I say,
Yeah.
and that's what I tell all the friends we play with. I say, dude, just pick one that looks cool. Because no matter how you put it together, if we're doing narrative play, we're just going to have fun. You're going to have fun, and you're going to be playing something that you thought was cool and that you enjoyed painting with. And one of our buddies, I think, actually did go out. Casey, didn't he? He got Corvus Cabal, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Just because he thought it was cool. Well, after we told him we couldn't get Sylvaneth because you weren't gonna be able to find it. But
Right.
yeah, but I think that that's always my recommendation. Get something that you think looks fun. Don't worry
Yeah.
about min-maxing. Once you get into the game and you decide you want to be competitive, then you can spend your hard-earned cash after you've done a little bit of research.
So this is an interesting question, Dan. I like it a lot. I would ask myself, okay, do I just want to focus on Warcry, or do I also want to play Age of Sigmar? Like, do I want to kind of dual purpose this, right? Because I think that would be a major fork in the road in terms of my decision that
See,
I'm making.
I think that complicates the question though, because then I'm gonna get into, well, I got to make sure I spend my money more effectively, and I don't buy a box that's going to give me models that aren't competitive in AOS right now.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends, right? Like, let's say I was like, oh, okay, I want to get into AOS. I want to get into AOS because, like, the advice that you gave, Jason, it's similar to AOS. It's kind of like, dude, just choose a faction that you think looks cool right now. They may not be the top dog, but wait another year and, like, by the time you get your collection up to snuff, a new book will be out for you.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so, like, you hear experienced AOS players say the same thing to newbies, right? Well, what looks cool to you? What would you like to play? You know?
Yeah, well, and there's definitely, there are people out there that chase the meta.
Yeah.
And, you learn very quickly that if you're going to chase the meta, you're going to be forking out thousands of dollars
Yes, you
regularly
are.
to
Yeah.
do so. And that's one thing we talked about, the accessibility of Warcry. It's, you don't got to fork out $500. You can fork it anywhere from $50 to $80.
Yeah.
You know, so before you feel like you're just dumping and for some people, to be honest, $80 in a game is still a lot of money.
Right.
But before you feel like you've really, because that was kind of my fear with AOS, was I was like, well, I want to play the game, I want to be semi-competitive, but I don't want to have to pay $800 to be competitive. And
right.
That was the problem I went when I went Blades of Corn. Or when I went Corn, I wanted to go Corn so bad because they look so cool to me, because I love, like, demonic stuff and, like, worshiping, chaos. But I bought the book. I got a bunch of army. I was getting ready to go, and these people were like, well, the only way you're going to actually win is if you have 3 bloodthirsters. And I'm like, gosh, that's like,
$1 million,
$700 and just, like 3 models or something. And so, But don't do that initially. That's what I would suggest.
I think if I were starting out, I would ask myself that question. Do I want to stick hardcore Warcry? Because if I were going hardcore Warcry, just based on the models, I would look at the unmade, because they're so freaking weird.
Yeah.
And
they're like faces on there. Yeah.
Oh man, they look crazy cool, and I don't know how good they are. I've got 20 unmade here that need to be painted on my desk, but I don't know how good they are, but they look really rad, and I think they would be a lot of fun to play with. But if I were to go like Age of Sigmar route, I'd probably look at just like one of the start collecting boxes, right? Like, so I think a great start collecting box to get into Warcry is the Khorne Mortals box, because you get like Korgorath, you get like all the things, and it's got like so much variety in that box that you've got a lot of different options in your army. So, and it's a good start collecting box for Age of Sigmar too, to get started. So that's kind of like, that would be my approach, right? Like, do I want to go hardcore Warcry? If so, what's the Warcry warband that visually appeals to me, right? I think the Spire Tyrants also looked kind of cool, and I also have a bunch of Splintered Fang here that I need to paint up.
Today is a good day for this, because when Warcry first came out, it was like you had 2 warbands that came in the starter set, and then or you were using AOS stuff. Whereas
Yep.
now, there's like, what are there, like 17 warbands now, just independent boxes, or what is it? Somewhere around there,
Oh,
right?
dude. I mean, if you're talking like a war bands, like all war bands in the books, like it's like 40 something, right?
But I mean individual boxes. If you
Oh.
don't want to go buy AOS stuff, there
What
are
is it? What do you think,
individual
Dan? Isn't there like 12 chaos bands? Is that right?
something like that.
Yeah, I think it's just short of that. I think it's like 8 or 9. There's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they've
Yeah.
all got, you can buy them in two ways. You can either buy the single box with the cards, or if you want to be able to mix and match more, you've got the double box, which is
Yeah.
technically labeled as like
The
AOS Slaves to Darkness
Yep.
Yeah.
box, but
Yeah.
really it's just a Warcry box, and it's only $15 more than the regular box is, so I think it's a great way to go.
It's a super good deal because
Yeah.
like the original, like the, for example, if I were to get the unmade, right? Like I think it's like what is it, $40, $50 for the box of 20.
Yeah, I think
And
those
then-
earlier armies are about $50.
Yeah, and then if you pay, but if you get the double Slaves to Darkness box, yeah, you don't get the cards, but if you have the book anyway, right, you don't need the cards, and so you got 20 for like 65 or something like that. It's a really good deal.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of the point, is that it's easy now for someone to point a friend at a lot of, low cost options to be able to pick something that looks cool to you, because
Yeah.
you've got a lot of options now.
And the other thing I want to sort of put out there, I've used it a few times as finding out if I like painting a faction.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Because if I've seen people, they get into AOS by just buying 6 boxes of a faction.
Oh yeah.
Or like, just dropping like 300, 350 on a faction for like their first 1200 points right away. And I don't know about you guys, but I know right away if I like the look of something, if I think it's cool.
Yeah.
But for me, it's not enough to just think something's cool. I also have to enjoy painting it. In fact, some of my favorite factions at this point, like Khorne Demons, I actually don't think they look cool, but I love painting them, right? So, um, I've used Warcry a couple times. Like Gloomspite Gits, I just think look amazing, but building them and painting them was just not fun. I hated building them. I liked painting them a little bit more, but building them was just
Yeah.
the worst. Goblins just don't go together well. They're so tiny.
Yeah.
My like fat fingers just could not. I just wasn't dexterous enough to collect this faction, right? So I just like sweat blood over my painting desk for about 2 months. But then at the end of it, I knew I didn't want Gloomspite Gits as an AOS force, and I had a Warcry warband um, of a color scheme that I still really like. And so,
Yeah.
every time I look at them, I kind of like chuckle to myself about the experience that was sort of building that warband. And so I think that would be my advice for people. Is if you don't want to get one of the starter sets, let's say your buddy is the place where you're going to be playing, or you're going to play at the LGS, so you just need a warband to start. Um, yeah, just get something experimental. Just get something that, you feel happy just kind of going off the deep end with. Maybe you have like a weird paint scheme in your head and you can just find out if you like it. I think this is a great game for just kind of experimenting like that.
And here's the thing: is like Gloomspite Gits, I think, is a perfect example of this. I really want to paint up a Gloomspite Gits warband. I have zero interest in painting 120 little stabas. Like zero interest. You know what I mean? But I will be happy to paint up 5 of them. That sounds great to me. And so even if you're not like interested in painting the whole army, like painting a warband is great, and you could get that itch out of being like, I really wanted to paint some Gloomspite Gits, without having to like invest in the entire army or feel like it's a waste, right? Because some people will just get the models and be like, okay, I did this, and it wasn't really for a competition or anything like that. I just did it because I thought the model was cool. Now it's just going to sit on my shelf. Well, now these guys got utility as well,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good stuff.
Oh, all right. Well, I think that we've given folks a great place to start. If you are curious about getting started, um, hopefully this answered a lot of questions for you. You know, try to find a starter box if you like that. Split it with a friend. That should save you some money. But if not, go out and find some of these boxes. Like, the boxes are everywhere, you know, and if you've already got an Age of Sigmar army, get yourself a core book, get yourself the Grand Alliance book that goes along with it, and then find a friend and play. I mean, it's really that simple, and it's a lot of fun. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight all together on our kickoff of Winning Warcry.
Yeah, this was a blast. And hey, if you're out there listening, take a look at the Tabletop and Beyond Facebook page and send a little message to us about, what Warcry like topics you'd like to hear covered. We're going to be doing this every month, and
Yep.
I think the game is going to develop enough that we're going to have content doing it just once a month, but we can absolutely do a segment on something if multiple people want to hear it. So yeah,
Oh,
let
I'd
us
love
know.
that. Yeah, we're on Facebook. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram, and we'll be putting stuff up on our YouTube channel as well. So, in terms of the podcast episodes, go up on our YouTube channel, and hopefully, we'll start getting some Warcry battle reports up
Yeah,
there
we're
as
gonna get
well.
some battle reports. That's one of our goals.
Yep. So we're excited about that. So thanks for joining us on this journey. We're excited to do this. And Dan, thank you again for being a co-host. We're excited for the collaboration with you, my friend.
Yeah, me too.
It's going to be great. So, all right, everybody. Thank you very much, and have a great night.
Have a good one.
See ya.